So as you all know, today we are going to be talking to Benjamin Boyce. He was another recommendation that you all gave me. So very grateful for people that give me recommendations for folks who are doing interesting work. And I'm going to let him explain in a second what happened at Evergreen State College and show you part of his documentary where you can go see it. The link is in the description. Just so everybody knows, at the time, this was in 2017, I was a television news reporter locally at the NBC affiliate in that area. I did talk to one of my coworkers today, which I'll talk about a little bit later, who covered it. I was an environmental reporter, many of you all know, so it wasn't something that was on my beat. But I did peripherally hear of it. I, however, did not quite understand the significance of it until I got into new media. So we'll talk with Benjamin about that in a second. Just in order of business before we get started, this is officially April, demonetization April, as I'm liking to call it now. I'll probably think of something a little catchier later, but all of you know that I am demonetizing my uploads for the month of April and trying to get people interested in heading over to other platforms that are a little bit more consistent for content that questions narratives and doesn't have tons of community guidelines, which I regularly violate. And right now, those platforms are Locals. And I also have a Patreon page that so far has not been shut down. So if you would like to support my work, you can go to Patreon or Locals. The links are in the description. There will be extra content from this interview that is going to be posted to those sites. And without further ado, let's bring in our guest, Benjamin Boyce, the one, the only, documentarian,
Behold.
Survivor of Evergreen State College. And I don't know what I'm more worried about people surviving after watching some of your documentary. I have a lot of questions. As I said in my open, I was a local TV reporter. You were a senior, correct? At the time this whole thing went down?
Yeah, I was about to graduate.
So I think a lot of people that follow my channel are probably aware of Bret Weinstein. What happened?
Stein.
Is it Stein?
One T.
Bret Weinstein.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that, because I've had so many people say the opposite and no one has really been able to pinpoint, but you've interviewed him, so you know for sure.
I have worked closely with the fellow.
Okay. Weinstein. Okay,
Yeah. Like fine wine.
Okay, I will never get that. Thank you
With a bagel
for clearing
company.
that one up. Okay, so Bret Weinstein. We now all know, and you heard it here first or last. Probably everybody already knows it was just me, but I have had people tell me, even people who follow him have told me different things. So I'm glad you clarified. So a lot of people, I think, who watch my channel are familiar, but there may be people who don't really quite understand exactly what went on. Obviously, it's kind of weird. It was a local story that sort of blew up in some areas, but I don't think every national news outlet covered it that much, so there could be people that just totally missed it. So do you mind us running us through what happened? What is Evergreen State College? What happened with the protests in 2017? And take it away.
Okay, so that's a lot to condense into an intro, but Evergreen State College was set up in 1986. Its charter was written in 1968, and then it was opened in like 1971 or 72. And it was an alternative college to give. They had a bunch of kind of hippie-ish ideals about what education could be. And when I found it, it was billed as a very individual-centric, hands-on learning, 360 degrees. You have a lot of power over what you do with your education, and there's a lot of wiggle room. So I say it's kind of like what Evergreen, where you can get away with anything or you can get away with nothing. Really depends entirely, more or less, on what you put into your degree. Now the sciences part, or the STEM part, is a little bit more demanding than the humanities, as we all know. But as the years progressed, Evergreen kind of became known as kind of a hippie college, and it kind of got a certain sort of understanding locally and kind of across the state of being kind of a little bit on the left, or rather progressive, even for Washington State. It was a little ahead of the curve in a lot of the ways. And when I arrived in 2013, I arrived on campus. I was an older student. I was 36 when I started. I had worked a lot in the so-called real world, and I I felt like I needed to get an education because I really wanted to use my mind and have my mind interact with other minds. So I decided to go to college because I thought that's what college was about. When I arrived on the campus, there was kind of like there was this mood or this attitude, this atmosphere of kind of this politically correct culture, probably from like peak 1993, 1994, kind of a lot of signs about the patriarchy and like the man is holding us back, and there was like a lot of vestiges of that kind of attitude. But as happened in colleges across the country, this new breed of politically correct ideology or frame of reference ramped up over the time that I was there. And in 2015, a new college president, who's still the president, George Bridges, came on. And the first thing he said officially to the campus was about race and racism, and that our job is to kind of catch up to the promise of America, that the civil rights movement had made a lot of gains, but racism was still heavily impacting every aspect of life, and we need to center that. And so we're going to do all these workshops and seminars about race, racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. And from that moment forward, he empowered certain faculty who were really on fire for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they implemented workshops, orientations, seminars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, promulgating this intersectional framework, this critical social justice ideology, where we are no longer seeking, like Martin Luther King was seeking, to kind of disregard race, look past race, see the common humanity among us all. We are now going to stop being colorblind and focus on race, focus on these differences, focus on gender and so on and so forth, focus on all these oppressions so that we can reverse them somehow or some way. And that escalated, that kind of set the bar of what the college was about. And post the crisis at Evergreen, I did a lot of reporting on it, and I had access to because it's a state institution, I had the power and the privilege of demanding documents from this institution that's paid for by the state. And I saw a lot of the behavior of the faculty and the staff with regards to these issues. And what they were doing in emails was the same thing that the students eventually did in person or on film, which was to single out dissidents, to castigate anybody who disagrees as a bigot, phobe, racist, etc. The faculty were already doing it. There was this very strong dogmatic push to focus on the world in one singular way. And all those workshops, orientations, seminars, lectures, there was no arguing this. There was only the presentation of this and everybody agreeing with these things, saying your pronouns, saying your privilege.
Can I ask you real fast, was it that nobody was questioning or arguing, or was it that just people were too scared to do so?
Well, I mean, that's impossible to tell. But every time that somebody did speak up, there was this person, the staff person in 2015, about 6 months before George Bridges, the current president of the Evergreen State College, came on, there was a shooting of two young Black men who, in one way of saying, were unarmed, but they were actually actively about to beat up a police officer with their skateboards. They had stolen some beer from a local Safeway. This happened a couple miles from the campus. The Black individuals were shot by a police officer. That sparked up a whole bunch of Black Lives Matter activity in Olympia, the city, and especially on State College. And that kind of set the tone for the urgency of implementing anti-racism, because right here in our midst, disregard the actual material facts of the matter, was police violence against Black bodies. And so we need to mobilize that. So they started setting up they started all these email conversations over that summer, all the staff and the faculty. And there was this attitude or this presupposition that Evergreen is as complicit in white supremacy and racism as any other institution in the history of the West. And one particular staff member said, actually, no, we're really progressive. We are not filled with white supremacists. Actually, everybody's actively anti-racist, and anybody who says contrary, anybody who says that you guys are wrong is called a racist and is hounded by everybody because you guys can't accept the actual facts. And then there was this huge stream of people calling this guy a racist. I'm sorry, this individual, he actually transitioned in the meantime. So there's all these intersecting identity oppression things going on with this individual, but they all dogpiled on him and shut him down as some sort of ignorant white male, though he was transitioning out of the category of man. So that attitude was on the campus, and a lot of what happened with Bret Weinstein is a direct result, or at least kind of the moral outcome of that attitude towards dissent and towards discussion and towards rigorous debate that was no longer allowed on this so-called place of higher education.
Okay, so
am I setting the ground correctly?
Yes, I think I'm getting a sense of it. So then that sets up this day of absence, I'm guessing.
Okay,
right?
The day of
because
absence.
Isn't that what then precipitated the protests that sparked? No, it's not. Okay. No wonder you did what, a 6-part documentary? How many parts do we? 24 parts to your documentary, which I will show everybody your YouTube channel in a second. Again, links in the description for Benjamin's YouTube channel, so you can go watch it. And admittedly, I've made it, I guess, a quarter of the way. Everybody knows
1/6.
1/6 of the way. I was not a math major. I was a history major. But it's very good, though I will admit that there's a lot of screaming. Some of it starts to sound very similar over and over again. So, yeah, but it lasted a long time. So, you know what? You gave it a fair, I will say this much. Having talked to my coworker at King, who also covered it and did about 5 stories, each about 2 minutes long, and you did 24, about 16 minutes long each. He admitted to me, he's like, I'm sure
it's about 8.5 hours now.
Okay, yes. So he said, he's like, there's plenty of fair criticism, but it's TV news, and that's how it works, unfortunately. And they probably did more than any other station in the area and did a lot for a local news station. But still, it is really hard to get, what you just did is 7 TV stories. Just that. So that's why I try to tell people, and I don't think anybody, it's not a shock to anyone that you're not getting the depth and entirety of stories when you watch TV news. We all kind of know that, but it just goes to show that if it's not for people like you, who decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to just pull out my cell phone and I'm going to start recording this and then I'm going to put it together, then, you wouldn't really have understood that. So yes. Okay. So now take us to the day of absence, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, before the day of absence, so in 2015, the president comes on, they start this whole, all these anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, and this thing called equity that nobody ever defines. And your government, my government, our Washington state government, is implementing all this stuff directly into law right now. Everything that happened at Evergreen, all that stuff that happened before Evergreen is now being mandated, K through higher ed, for every teacher and every student to learn all this stuff. Okay. And they're not defining what it is. They're not defining equity, inclusion, diversity. It's just there. Anyhow, so in 2016, an event happened that shook the college. There was a presidential election, and everybody was pretty sure that this woman called Hillary Clinton would win. Turned out this other man called Donald Trump won, and that shook the very foundations of Evergreen, because now we had a fascist dictator ruling the country, was about to set up internment camps, Auschwitz, all over again. That was the mentality on the campus, that we are now facing an existential threat of democracy. And there was really no room to argue that, because if you did, you'd be called white supremacist, or you're devaluing the lived experience of the people who are seeing this truth in their bones. When Trump got, about a week after Trump got elected, they came out with this equity plan, and they had this whole meeting. I was in this meeting. I was on camera. I worked for the media department. I was filming the meeting at the instruction of my boss, and they had this entire ceremony about this equity proposal, this equity document, that there's a lot of work to do, and it's called the Canoe Meeting. And if you haven't seen it, you need to try to watch it. I distilled it in my documentary. I think it's episode 4, probably 5 or 6. But they they have this Native American ceremony. There's all this chanting, this drumming. They get in this imaginary canoe. At the end, they're all apologizing for their privilege. They unveil this plan, but the plan is very nebulous. It's about fixing the institution by looking at everybody according to their race and then rebalancing history, reversing these hierarchies in order to achieve this thing called equity, which I think actually on the ground means equalization. Everybody becomes equalized. All the outcomes are equal now. That is fairness. This equity proposal was hidden under heaps and heaps of all this rhetoric and this talking and all the ceremony and stuff. But the actual document is founded on very faulty data. I have a recording of the lead statistician of Evergreen State College saying that they cherry picked all the data to get the story that they wanted in order to implement what they wanted, which was equity. So it's a faulty document, and then it grabs a whole bunch of power. They want to insert themselves under the guise of equity over hiring and over promotion. So it's a huge power grab for a very small contingent, a very ideologically motivated and highly dogmatic contingent of the staff, of the faculty, to take control over the entire institution under the largesse of George Bridges, current president. Bret Weinstein, Mike Peros, and Alan Nasser, three pretty fabulous guys. They all stand up via email and start arguing against this proposal, saying it's going too far, it's not defined, yada, yada, yada. And all of the pro-diversity, equity, inclusion people dogpile on them, and there's this huge email battle that goes on and on and on and on and on. And so that is
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Showing that there's a lot of tension between the interfaculty tension. Yeah.
Are all three of these people white men?
Yeah, but two are Jewish. Well, they're three. They're okay. Jewish.
I'm just curious because, I can imagine how the response was. I'm guessing that was brought up, right? That's okay.
That's always a factor.
Continue, please.
They start out saying that being colorblind is something that we need to get over, and then they end up not being able to see anything other than race. That's the Evergreen story in a nutshell. They throw away meritocracy, they throw away colorblindness, and then you have a bunch of very poor communicators divvying themselves up based on a racial hierarchy. That's basically what you have.
Okay, so they write these. They basically say enough is enough. Like, this is going too far. Which, and I would like if you wouldn't mind explaining. Maybe, I mean, Bret's a big name. I don't know about the other two. Are all three of these also known as being somewhat? I mean, or did you know their political or social worldviews going into this? Like, I knew my professors in college. I could probably name, like, okay, that one's kind of a conservative, that one maybe not so much, whatever. Like, I'm just curious, what was it understood that, hey, these guys are progressives or they're on the left, but they just had enough? Like, what was or just these are white guys that just don't get it? What were the thoughts about these people and why they decided to speak up?
That speaks to an institutional problem at Evergreen, is that Evergreen, because it was so the faculty had so much power, they had the power to select, and they selected left and left. They kept on selecting towards the left. Every successive, kind of cohort of professors over time kept on selecting more and more progressive. Mike Peros, I think, is the most not left of those three. Bret is heavily left, a Bernie supporter, lefter, or more left than Hillary Clinton. And Alan Nasser, I don't know too much about him, but I'm pretty sure they're all very progressive people, at least until this sort of progressivism came along.
Okay.
So in the winter of 2016, 2017, the college planning committee for the Day of Absence, which was a tradition that had happened for years and years, for decades. It was based on a Douglas Turner word play about a southern town where the Black people absented themselves from the town. And the play's about just how integrated the whites and the Blacks are, and how the white people are very indebted to the Black people. They just overlook them. And so that Day of Absence was kind of a replication of that. So they would have workshops off campus, and they would talk about their things. And then there would be a day of presence where everybody came together and celebrated difference and had a big hoo-ha, probably with the bouncy house or at least a mandolin. Now, in 2016, 2017, they're like, let's switch it and invite the white people to leave campus to center, this is their words, to center the campus on people of color. And Bret Weinstein wrote an email, said, it's one thing for a group to absent themselves. It's another thing for an institution, a public institution, to say, white people, you should probably go away. And while there's some, it's more complex than the news bites say. There was heavy suggestions that white people leave. I have evidence that certain classes required participation, where if you were white, you were to get credit, you would have to go into the woods and have a anti-racist session with your white peers under a tarp in the rain. So there was some abuse, or at least segregation. And also the events that they had, the official events, the ones on campus, were all about being against whiteness, how Asians are complicit in white supremacy, how white supremacy, and then the off-campus event for white people was all about them learning their supremacy, learning their privilege, and learning how to invert that hierarchy. So what they were actually teaching, if you kind of get into it, were they forcing white people off or whatever, it doesn't really matter, because the content of what they're teaching is incredibly toxic, in my estimation, having been there and having been exposed to all these workshops and having to state my pronouns in front of every class and all this stuff like that.
I was going to say, I'm sure what you're saying lights people up, just especially some of the folks that you went to school with, maybe a lot of them. And I can even see people at my old newsroom would listen to you and say, what the hell is coming out of this guy's mouth? And I'm going to let people decide for themselves.
In what way?
Oh, man. Well, because people... There are a lot of people who, as you saw, I mean, let's look at your video for a second, shall we? They get really riled up about, thinking that this is really good stuff, that this is needed stuff. Let me pull this up. Hang on a second. I want to show everybody your channel here.
No, this is coming to every single school.
Here we go.
Every single school in Washington is going to have this.
Yeah, but that's because, right, there are a lot of people who think that it's needed, and in fairness, you present a counterpoint that often is not shared, I think, because there are a lot of people in journalism who are nervous to interview somebody like you, and frankly, they have their own safe space conversations about this stuff. And to me, I recently heard, okay, so my old station, everybody can go look it up. They're running a whole series on race right now. And
of course they are.
And it's interesting because when I was hearing one of the new producer, I don't even know, talking about why they were doing it. They're like, well, we have to do this because there's research that shows A, B, and C, right? And we're journalists and we cover research. But what I don't see in a lot of the coverage is, say, the person of color who totally disagrees with this, who thinks that this is a terrible idea. And you often see it just because this is something that I didn't really even realize until, once again, environmental reporter in the middle of nowhere, hanging out with Wolverines, not totally up to speed with what was happening at Evergreen, and happy to be out with the Wolverines. Okay.
You have scars.
Never got to get that. I didn't get to get close enough, unfortunately. But I have heard them make noises, and they
could you replicate
badass
the noise?
Mofos.
Are you allowed?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're
Is it copyrighted?
It's
Whoa.
but really loud. If my daughter wasn't sleeping, actually, I think she just woke up. But yeah, so anyway. I was much happier to be out in the Cascades. But like I was saying, so I know my station. When they say this stuff, hey, if you didn't cover what's happening on college campuses or cover this, you would be doing a disservice. But unfortunately, it's not. They think, I think, in a lot of ways, they're covering it from this one angle, they already have the agenda in mind, and they're not necessarily including voices like yours I think maybe, I don't know what, I mean, I'm just curious. Do you get called a racist for saying this kind of stuff? I mean, you are a white guy. I don't know how you identify, but you look like a white guy.
For it's so stupid. Like it's like so stupid. Okay, we can get to we can get to post Evergreen. Like my solution to Evergreen has been my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
If you look on the second or the third level of my YouTube channel, it's all interviews with people of all different identities.
Yeah.
I'm talking to everybody except for the people that want to shut down other people.
Mm-hmm. And
as long as you're not an illiberal,
but I'm just asking you, are you called that? I mean, do people use that? Do people say Benjamin's he just doesn't care about people of color? He's a racist. I've watched your videos of what happened at Evergreen. People were angry. I mean, should I show people some of this stuff? Like, just pull it up and while we're talking,
show.
Do you have a favorite story episode?
One. You can like do episode 1. You could probably scrub into like probably minute. Okay. It's only 16 minutes, right? So you could probably do the last 4 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, because let's see here. So this, and I mean, I don't know if I should put the sound on or not, if people can even hear it. Ho ho! Bret's gotta go. Hey, that makes me feel like I'm right back in Seattle. I'm not trying to make fun, but it's like the hey ho ho at every protest is hey ho ho. So there he is, and he's wearing. I was glad to see you get to wear shorts and water shoes to class. So it's a casual Friday every day there. But
look at how happy they are.
Yeah, but everybody's very angry. I mean, it looked like, and I got so many questions about the sort of safety side of this too, because there were a lot of people saying they felt unsafe. My read watching the video was these students were in control. That's what I saw. I don't know if that was, but it looked like they were in control of what was going on, not the other way around. So I was truly trying to understand the safety aspect of it, like what people were really scared of. Oh. But to go back to my original question.
Okay.
Did you talk like this when you were there, and like when you're coming out and you're calling out your concern for the direction that higher education is going, or lower education, kindergarten at this point. What's the response from the other side? Do they argue your points? Do they say, you're just a white guy who will never understand? Of course you're saying this. What's the response from the people who don't already agree with you? Are they willing to engage?
Is my face on the
Yes.
camera?
Mm-hmm.
So I can address the lovely audience.
Yep. You're up.
Okay. So over the course of that year, so the day of absence, Trump gets elected, day of absence, but I'm working in the media department, and I'm watching all these seminars, and it's turning into a seminary. I have experience of a cult in my early years, and like I'd be in these rooms and the hairs would be tingling on the back of my head. I'm like, they're doing something here that's no longer education. Like there's some sort of religious aspect that they're calling upon, and you can't really talk against it, because there's all these just very firm, this is how we do things, this is how we think, and to think otherwise is to think wrong. And I watched as these protests leading up to the major protest were happening, and then happening again and happening again. There was this they were going to sign in or do some sort of ceremony for the new police chief, who was a white female, but dedicated to expanding and training the campus police to be more culturally competent. And all of these, what's the right word? Just all these ne'er-do-wells come in and start, like I set up the event, all of the staff and the faculty start showing up, and then all these protesters come up and start screaming and yelling and screaming all these expletives, all these obscenities, and then grabbing the mic and destroying, being violent with the school property, and then eating all the cake, which is what really pissed me off. They showed up and then they screamed against the police officer, and then they ate all of her cake. And then they just kind of like laughed at how powerful they were. And I'm watching the current president of the college do nothing, just kind of stand and just like let them do their thing. And watching like his chief administrator get assaulted, like this person like kind of grabs her and then grabs the mic, and he's just standing there, just like Anyways, I have some moral.
Okay. Did we ever tell people? Did we ever tell people exactly what the day of absence was and why Bret and his cohort were concerned with it when they hadn't been in protest of it in the past years? Because that's an important point, right? He said to the students in one of your videos, "I've never protested the day of absence before. I'm doing it this year because it's different, saying we're going to leave voluntarily instead of saying white people have to leave," basically, which they were saying we're not forcing anyone, but it made it very clear that if you didn't go, right, that was what I understood. Okay, yeah, there was a little bit of pressure. And
there was pressure.
Real fast, just to get to this super chat before it goes away, Bob says, when Evergreen State happened, then
you can scroll up.
Scroll up? What do you mean?
Yeah, you can just like let it hang there and then scroll up back to it.
What are you? I don't know what you're looking at. Are you on? Do you know you're on Allison Morrow's channel, or do you think you're on Charlize Theron's channel?
You do have like a resemblance, like in the one movie she did with Nicole Kidman. I can't.
Okay, at least it wasn't the monster one where she was that serial killer. But anyway, well, I don't know what you're talking about. You
could pull off a mean Furiosa, actually, now that we're on the topic of Charlize.
Well, when I had shorter hair and I used to really super bleach my hair, I used to get. In fact, one time I actually had people finally come up and ask me for an autograph because they thought I was Megyn Kelly. But I'm really short and I believe she's really tall, so it's just one of those things that I guess you don't see on camera. But it's funny because I used to work at Fox when I first started. So when these people came up to me and they started asking me questions about Fox, like what was it like working with Bill O'Reilly, I just answered them. But I didn't realize they were asking me because they thought I was Megyn Kelly. So I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't run into him that often. He's not that bad of a guy, I guess. And they're like, what's it like, with this person and that person? I just answer. And then finally at the end, someone's like, can I get your autograph? I'm like, okay. And one person even said, I love your work. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I was in TV, so I guess these people watch my stuff, and it's like, okay, never mind. This is my cousin's wedding. I was, and the end, like, okay, the catering staff is coming up and asking me for my autograph. And I'm like, no, when I said it, okay, forget it. Anyway. So Bob says, when Evergreen State happened, the mainstream consensus assured us this was a rare issue isolated to campuses. Well, and maybe even to your campus, but recently I was scrolling through some headlines and it looks like everyone now, if they have a similar incident, says, is this the next Evergreen? So Evergreen, so it's just, you guys have become the symbol of what would you call it? A student mutiny? I'm not quite sure what
I would say I would think of it. I think that there's room to call it 2020 in miniature. I really do think. And when a year ago, when everything blew up, or last June, I'm like, this is Evergreen, and it's going full bore. It's going across America. Like all the different levels of behavior are present. The young people in the streets, the weak leadership. And then all of those hidden bureaucratic HR meetings that actually swoop in under the social justice, all that protest stuff, they swoop in, and now everybody has to think the same way, which is what happened at Evergreen.
So, all right. So basically what ends up happening, right, is that then there are this explosion of protests over Bret and these other guys saying, no, this is wrong, right? No, that's not what happens.
No.
Okay. They write the emails, and then what happens?
The protest itself. They write emails. The teachers are going back and forth. Blah 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 blah. Day of absence comes and goes. Everybody forgets about it. Then there's a Facebook post by one of the key protesters saying that he wants the next year's Media Works program to be mostly Black and brown bodies, so that we can have a solidarity and look at the history of Black and brown bodies in film. And another student of color makes a parody post saying that we want a mostly white class filled with white people so we can look at the experiences of white people over something else. He changes everything. He swaps out the race and the title of the class. It was totally a joke. And that sends the Facebook class of 2020 Evergreen page into an absolute just shambles, and they all call him a racist, and they all just dogpile on this young man, and there's just all this tension, and they're going back and forth, and then there's this incident where Keave, the man who wrote the parody
who is in your documentary, correct? Okay, while you're talking, I'm going to find him.
This is all covered in the
Okay,
first.
yes, I remember him. Because didn't people say he was white, but he's not white? I wasn't really quite sure.
He's white. He's got light skin privilege. So
Okay.
white privilege becomes light skin
but
privilege.
What is he actually? Do we know?
He's Puerto Rican and Native American and white.
Okay, I'll show people him in a second, but go ahead, take it away. Continue.
This is covered in the first episode. But there's this incident where Keawe is kind of threatened or softly threatened by another student of color, and Keawe is fearing for his life, and I think he's playing hijinks and stuff, and apparently I found out that he was posting what people were saying about him on Facebook around the dorms and stuff, and they were saying some very terrible things, and they were saying some very racist things, that he's white on the inside and his mom should beat him up or something as a child.
Here he is.
Is he going to speak, or do I speak over him?
No, you can speak over him. I'm just putting his photo up here so people can see. Okay. This is Keawe.
Do a Muppet voice, but I don't think I can do actually his voice.
See, he's just talking, but you're putting words in his mouth. Okay, now he's not on the screen anymore.
So I'm talking. Okay. So there's an incident between him and other people of color. He feels threatened. He goes to the campus police. He makes a statement. The campus police ask the other students to make a counter statement. The other students, there's all this hubbubaloo that I won't get into here, but the other students eventually decide to go to give a voluntary statement at the police services place. And then they put out on social media that they've been taken out of their dorms at night and detained against their will by the police. They lie about what's happening. A bunch of people show up, and then they have cause to call Evergreen racist. They declare at that moment that Evergreen is assaulting bodies of color, or black bodies, or whatever. And that's not my words. These are their words. When they talk about bodies, that's how they talk about themselves. That's how they think about themselves. So then they get in this big, the students just get unrest because there was these two black bodies that were detained against their will. That's the story. So they start to have these like nightly meetings about how they're going to show this racist institution that they won't stand for this anymore. And they end up planning a week-long protest. And somebody in that planning says, Bret Weinstein was against the day of absence because he's a white man and he thinks that he has the privilege to, disrespect black people, right? So they just decide that Bret Weinstein is the first place that they are going to protest. But they're going to protest the entire college. It was just totally random that they decided to protest him. And it was totally random that he's like, no, let's talk this through. And they post all that footage onto the internet, and he's got connections with some big players up there. So that footage gets just flushed through the internet.
Okay.
And they keep on going. They go from Bret Weinstein's. You have to watch the whole thing. They have complete control. They have the entire institution by whatever gonads you choose to name or to bequeath under Evergreen, because I think they're completely sterilized at this point as an institution of higher education. But still, those students at that moment had complete power over the institution for the next week, and they filmed the whole thing.
Okay, I'm showing some people what's going on here. It appears that we have some talking inside. We have some meeting outside. And there was one point where I remember them saying that a mother even called and said, my daughter is being held hostage. And then a lady makes an announcement that if you feel like you're being held hostage, you should be able to go. But then that also turned into drama. Yeah. Because it was weaponizing motherhood.
Yeah. It's yeah.
So
they're
oh, here you are with Bret.
Totally off the rocker.
So okay, but like this was a very obviously. I mean, I know you're laughing about it, but at the time, this was a pretty serious event for that area, right? And I know you've had your 2020 like hindsight on it.
I was on campus.
I know that's what I'm saying though.
This was terrible.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, you're laughing right now, but I'm curious, like, did you have this, because were you thinking that as this is all going down? Were you scared? Were you like, what the hell is happening here? Were you like, I don't know, maybe I agree with some of their points? Like, I'm just curious. I'm not going to assume anything about you. What are you thinking as this is all going down? you're a few months from graduation and you're filming this. Listen, I know what it's like to stick my...
I'm not filming any of this. This is all found footage.
Oh, okay.
This is all
okay,
found
that's
footage.
good to know. Because
except for one thing I filmed. I filmed one thing. It's episode 22.
So did you have the rights to put that video
my
up?
Answer to your question.
Or does anyone not care? Do people not care?
Come on. Are we gonna
No,
gonna
I'm just curious
here?
if people came after you and said, "Hey, that's my video. I don't want you using it." I'm just curious because listen, I've covered stuff like that, and there are a lot of people who would say, you better take my video down. I've been at events like that where somebody would try to smash my camera out of my hand. So
yeah, it's too late now.
It's too late
for that. But to answer your previous question, it was a mixture of ridiculous and wrong. There was something wrong, but I had already called it wrong. I told people that this is wrong. The way that these people are behaving is wrong. And the way that they're behaving is due to what you're teaching them, which therefore makes what you're teaching them wrong. And they will never, ever admit that. They will never admit that what they're teaching, what they believe is wrong.
Well, they don't think it's wrong.
So they have to completely...
Why would they admit it?
Even if you look at what it causes, but it's like materially, it leads to the destruction of conversation, of education, and of civil discourse.
But what if they say that that's necessary? Necessary because isn't that what's said? I mean, isn't that the counterpoint to what you're saying? Is that there has to be this sort of fissure here of the sort of nice way of going about it?
Yeah.
So
they do.
What type?
And they won't build anything. They won't build anything. I mean, we're getting beyond the story into the roots of it, but this ideology is all about redistribution. It's not about creation. It's not about merit. It's about reparation. And not to say that reparations can't be done in a proper way towards the Black community for slavery. There's proper ways to deal with these issues. Critical race theory and so-called anti-racism pit people against each other. It pits everybody. It causes you as a white person to either be an ally and follow, or to be castigated as an enemy because you disagreed. There's no compromise. There's no community there. There's only our way, or I guess ultimate cancellation.
Oh,
that's how it works.
Okay, so give me the counterpoint to what you're saying right now. In other words, you just to be fair, like you bring this up in a debate if you can debate, because again, from the video you shared, it seemed like there were a couple times that Bret said, "Would you like to hear what I have to say?" And they're like, "No," So I don't even know. I don't know what is the, where you would have discussion to try to, I don't know, move forward.
But
what's the counterpoint? What would someone say to you if, and maybe they already have, maybe you've tried to have these discussions, or maybe not, I know now, but back then, like maybe you did at school. I don't know. I'm not quite sure if you felt like you speaking up in that environment, but I'm just curious, what's the counterpoint to what you're saying? Cause you're obviously very critical of all of this stuff, and you are do your opinion, but obviously there are a lot of people who would disagree with you. What's the counterpoint?
Yeah. Well, there are positions held deeply within the Black community, specifically the Black community, that the way that the America project has happened has disadvantaged them over and over and over again, and that they've been set back, they've been cut off from their entire culture due to slavery, and then they've been cut off from generational wealth over time. And there are arguments to be had about that and discussions to be had with that contingent of that community. And within the Black community, there are a lot of discussions going on about the proper way forward. This sort of thing, when it's implemented across the board on an institution of higher education, causes that one thing that is I will say a very strong and authentic woke culture, like that, where it comes from in the Black community, is watered down and it's bureaucratized, and it becomes a part of a system where you have this institution that is now imposing a view of the world on every one of its members and policing, either overtly or covertly, the attitudes and the beliefs and all the relationships between every individual is now sieved through these identity categories that reduce everybody into some sort of marker of privilege and oppression. It happened at Evergreen at an orientation, like the before classes even begin. I'm in this orientation on how to it's about my job and like how to be a good, person working in media. But all it was critical intersectional theory, where they had all these categories: sex, race, gender, socioeconomic status, blah blah blah, and then they filled out who is the most privileged: the white male cis heterosexual, uh, Protestant, blah, blah, blah. They actually listed the dominant character, which is the exact same thing that happened in Germany when they decided to list who had power over everybody else, who was therefore the enemy. They made an enemy of the white male. And throughout the college experience, there were quip after joke after overt just slander of white men as white men. And if you brought up a white man who agreed, you would have to apologize. I know he's a white man, but he talks really well about anti-racism. Like it was just everywhere, all the time, constantly. It was constant.
So did
it totally
okay?
ridiculous.
So then, just I'm curious. Did then people say, "Well, yeah, okay, Benjamin, of course you hate this stuff because you're a white guy, and you just feel browbeat, and you're just trying to get back at everybody." I mean, I'm just curious. Do people say that? Because okay. Yeah. Well, what's your response? I'm not saying you listen. I believe that people should be having these debates. Absolutely. That's why I had you on my channel, right?
You're trying to get.
I'm just trying to understand because, okay, I think this phenomenon that you documented at your university or college. I'm not totally sure what the difference is between a university and college, but
master's programs or doctorate programs.
Thank you. So it should be discussed, and the debates that are happening should be allowed to happen. I'm 100% on board with hearing how people are talking on all the different sides, because I know it's not just a two-sided thing. There's a lot of different thought about how race should be, and equality versus equity, and how to move forward, and all the stuff that you've brought up. I think what bothers me is that oftentimes, like when mainstream media covers it, which is my background, is that you don't necessarily get to hear the diversity of opinion because, well, of course, like we've almost gone, an hour almost? Are we almost at an hour? Yeah. And
we'll get there.
And and there's no way this is not happening. If it does happen, I think newsrooms maybe hide behind the time limit, and they're like, oh, we're not going to touch that because we just don't have time. And then, but they're like, but phew, we'd rather not because that's a scary topic for us. There's probably a little bit of that, but I do think it's either I don't get when I watch mainstream news and like critical race theory is brought up, for instance, I don't feel like I'm getting a good sense like I get when I watch new media, when I'm online, I'm on YouTube channels and hearing. Even Vice does a pretty good job sometimes of at least because they're a little more institutional than like you or me right now, kind of out on our own. And they'll at least touch it in a little bit of a longer form, and they'll do videos, say on like black conservatives, for instance, for Trump.
They did an excellent video on Evergreen.
Oh, okay.
They did an excellent video on Evergreen.
So they'll touch it, but
June 10th,
and I do think I saw parts of that one as well. I just think, unfortunately, it gets framed a lot like what you're saying. Okay, so if you are challenging this, you're any number of these terrible terms, when actually like there are a lot of people who are, people of color in these categories that you're, like what the pro-critical race theory people would call like the oppressed categories that are actually fighting back against this idea. And their voices should be allowed at the table too. And it's hard to watch sometimes the names and labels thrown at them as well. Like how ostracized are they from their own communities, their own families for saying like, I don't want to go down that path. That should also be covered. What it's like. So it's usually framed, at least like, say I watched my, the series that my last station was doing. And a lot of it is like, interviewing the white photographer is, their one question, is your dad racist? And he's like, yes, my dad is racist. But you don't, at least I haven't watched it all, but I haven't so far seen the points of the people that are like, well, wait a second, I'm a person of color. I'm a woman. I'm all these other things. And I don't ascribe to this. And I would personally like to see more of a healthy, just calm, logical conversation among people who, and unfortunately, the problem I think a lot of times in the internet world is that everybody goes to their own corner. So you have to go to all these different places to try to hear the differences of what people think. And I wish personally, because this is not a topic I know a ton about, and I just flat out say that I want to learn more about what's going on college campuses. It's been a long time since I've been a student at one. Obviously, I covered the University of Washington, protests a lot. But I just wish there was more opportunity to get a sense of the variety of how to think through this, instead of just like, it always is either like pro critical race theory or anti-critical race theory. And it does, you just don't really get a good sense if you're somebody like me who truly just wants to understand like the different points of view to talk about race in America right now. It just seems to be way oversimplified. And I'm just saying, like, I would like to see more diversity of thought.
Yeah. That's how I'm here today.
Well, you're here today because I invited you on my channel.
Well,
and I am the Megyn Kelly of YouTube.
While.
No, somebody said that I'm a dollar store Megyn Kelly in the comment section. I saw that.
You got to own that. You got to own that.
Somebody said Allison.
You
that
show
was.
up with a kazoo
I don't know
next
what
time.
it was that I said here, but Surviving the Six says, Allison, that was a straw man. What was a straw man? What did I say? Do you remember? I'm trying to find the Allison is the $10 or $1 store.
You just gotta let those things go. You gotta
it's funny.
Embrace the YouTube.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Snarker. You should actually put that on a freaking mug and get a little bit of extra baby money.
Idea. I gotta find it. Oh well.
That's what you gotta do.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know that. Well, it's probably dinner time, or I don't know. You live in Olympia, so bar crawl time.
I have a little bit more time. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Dollar store. Yeah. Dollar store Megyn Kelly here has 10 times the informational value of the real Megyn Kelly. So at least it ended. It was a compliment sandwich, but a compliment sandwich with only one piece of bread. Because it was an insult. And
well, isn't that called, what was that? That's an open sandwich.
Yeah, right? Open face sandwich. That's true. I kind of like those, like a little bit of avocado and an egg on toast. Does that politically out me?
Going avocado? Are you millennial? Are we treading into millennial territory?
Not really. I'm 39. It's not really a millennial. I'm right on the border. I'm an old millennial.
Yeah. Okay.
Which makes me an millennial. Let's see if there are any other questions here that. Okay, here we go. Allison, your pushback against his stance on anti-woke was not very strong. Just saying. I'm not even really trying to push back on you. I'm just actually just trying to understand and ask what the other viewpoint would be. Like,
there are discussions to be had. My problem is that the institutions are wholeheartedly adopting a single point of view, and embedded in that single point of view, critical race theory is it's like a virus. At Portland State University, very recently, they have declared that criticism of their ideology is equatable to harassment. So actual debate is now harassment against this ideology. I've seen it. There's something pernicious and very dogmatic about it. Now, there are people who adhere to this who have very good reasons to be quote unquote woke and to see these power structures and to strive for equality for their community. And to go about doing that by bringing attention to those problems, those historical oppressions. There is a place and a way of going about allowing America to see its faults, to really see its faults. I would like that movement and that education to be embedded in, but what are we going to do now? And look at how far we've come. That's what I want. I don't want to erase our past. I don't want to embrace a past that never existed or existed maybe for me and not for somebody else. I want to see what was and and come together with the promise of a better future for all of us, a more equal union, or a more perfect union. I want that. But that has to have honesty, but it can't have intolerance. It cannot have screaming and demanding that people agree with you and give you their resources, be it their morality is bent to you, their attention is bent to you, or their finances are bent to you. I will not adhere to a new oppressive regime that puts me on the bottom, and then take seriously at all somebody saying that I'm going to be losing out because of my skin. Like, it's time for me to be on the bottom. Is that what you're saying? Which just means that you want the boot on somebody else's throat. I don't want anybody's boot on anybody's throat. Seriously. And so since my documenting of Evergreen, since I spent a long time talking through email after email. I just have a channel based on me reading government documents that are incredibly boring and laughing at them. But I branched out from that to do interviews with people in all these different communities. And the only people that I don't interview is people that want to shut down discourse. Because I want, if they want to control the conversation, you go ahead. I'm going to have real discourse with people over here of all these different identities, and try to build friendships and understanding with people as individuals. And then we can actually dig into the problem with vested interest that's across all these different boundaries, because ultimately it all helps us all when we're all pitching in together. But we have to do so voluntarily. That's my spiel.
I would love, you know what I'm going to do? They won't do it. They won't do it, but I would love to have somebody from my old newsroom come on my channel and talk. We'll do a debate here. Not even a debate, just a conversation about your thoughts on this, and see if they would include you in their series. I would actually really like it won't happen, but I just think.
Why did you leave?
Why did I leave? For a lot of reasons, but twofold, personal and professional, and they were basically the same. I wanted the kind of lifestyle that allowed me to practice what I had begun to understand as the kind of, I don't know, best practices to steward our natural resources. I was an environmental reporter, and I got to know a lot about what's happening in our waterways and to our wildlife. And so I professionally was learning I was learning information that made it very difficult to continue a life in the city where I was dependent on infrastructure that I just felt like I could do better on my own. You know what I mean? And so there was that. And I also just hated coming back to the city because I was spending so much time out in the quiet, in the wild. And I enjoyed being in peace and quiet more often. Professionally, I did not feel like I was able to accomplish the kind of journalism that I set out to do every day. The pace was too quick. The stories were too short. And if you're covering something simplistic, which does happen in TV news, there's plenty of stuff that can be covered in 2 minutes. You don't need to drag on a story about the latest restaurant that's open downtown. Like, that doesn't have to go 10 minutes. But what I was covering was very complex, and I just could not share the complexity that I wanted to be able to do, and really have the time to truly understand what I was talking about. So I found myself in this chicken and egg thing, or like just dog chasing the tail analogy, I guess, where I was dumbing down what I was capable of doing to avoid being wrong. And that meant I would just only go after stories that did no harm. So let me give you an example. No offense to this particular pizza chain, local pizza chain, great pizza, but they had started using boxed water instead of bottled water to get rid of plastic, or bottled anything. I think they were done with bottles, but maybe it was just water. It was boxed water. I can't really remember. This is not a story that requires a ton of thinking, right? It's just like, hey, this restaurant's gonna do boxed water now. Now, hey, if you could perhaps do a story on, is that really is that really going to make a difference for the environment going from bottle to box? Because there's a fair debate to be had about the plastic bag bans and whether plastic bag bans really achieve what environmental groups would like people to think they achieve. Because if you look at input and output, you can look it up online. There's a lot of research to show that there's an intense environmental footprint to produce a paper bag. On the output end, the paper bag is better because it will biodegrade, but the plastic bag requires far less energy, fertilizer, all that other stuff. So these are the kind of debates that I would have liked to have had more often. Going back to my original topic, it was just, hey, look, there's a restaurant that isn't going to do bottled water. And I'm like, I can do more than this. I want to do the Clean Water Act stories. I want to talk about endangered salmon, which I was doing, but I felt like I would come back and I couldn't read the material I needed to read. There were Senate reports I needed to read, for instance. There were research papers I needed to read. And so I just said as little as possible so as not to be wrong and not to mislead the viewer. But I guess in a way it is kind of misleading when you're oversimplifying a very complex topic. So I kind of had this crisis of profession at the same time that I was having this lifestyle change. And it just seemed to make sense to me that either I was going to change my profession that was going to then allow me to have the lifestyle I wanted, or, I was just totally going to just quit altogether. And so I pitched to them to let me go digital and to be able to live in the middle of nowhere. And I would do longer form stuff. And they said it was kind of nuts, my idea. So I just quit. So that's basically what happened. I don't know. That's kind of the long story of it, but I wanted to be able to be in the environment that I had been covering. I wanted to live out what I had been learning. And I also just wanted to be a better journalist. And those were just not options in my industry. I think it actually could have ended up becoming a successful position for them, but it's better for me now because I own all of my material. I probably would have done all of this stuff for them and they would own it all. So it's a good thing that they didn't want me, I guess. So I don't know. Do you think I made the right choice?
Do you feel alive?
Yeah, much better. Yeah, and I have a daughter now who I can spend actual time with, and I have energy for her instead of being overwhelmed constantly. Because I don't know if you know this, but in pretty much every market now, but in Seattle even, a lot of the reporters shoot and edit all their own stuff. So you're like doing everything.
So they're just a bunch of YouTube guys with dental insurance.
Basically. And now that they're broadcasting from home, it's even worse.
Yeah.
So yeah, they are. They all are like YouTube, and they used to make fun of me, and now here everybody's a YouTuber. I actually have a video on my channel about that, talking with my buddy who quit CNN and does YouTube. And but yeah, so we all, we shot and edited our own. You had like 4 hours a day to really get your work done. And of that, how much time did you really have to digest and understand what you were talking about? Like none of it, because most of that is just the mechanics of the job, driving the car to wherever your story is, shooting the video, coming back and logging the video, logging the interview, then editing the story, tracking, voicing. By the time like you've written it, I remember one time, well, not just one time, many times, which is crazy, bringing my boss my script, and he's like, okay, I see this person says this and this person says that, but what's the truth? And I was like, hell if I know. I have no idea what the truth is. You guys don't give me enough time to tell the people what is this person BSing? Like, I have no idea. So, and I don't know, maybe, I guess somebody could argue maybe that's a better position for some journalists to be in, because when journalists go in thinking like, I know the truth, right? Then you end up with problems like we've talked about today, that there are problems, holes in coverage and blind spots in coverage, because maybe it's better sometimes to go in not knowing, not thinking that you're the expert in anything, because maybe you're more curious that way. But I at least wanted to know a little bit more about what I was covering. So that's kind of why I left. I'm trying to see.
There you are. You're not a know-it-all yet, but you're a more know-it-all.
I'm a more know what I don't know at all.
Oh, there we go. You're on the Socratic path.
Gonna
drink some hemlock pretty soon here.
Yeah. Well, I do have a Master of Divinity degree now. Seattle is hell on earth. Queen Boutica Radiant says. Do you agree?
How much do you charge for a blessing?
Charge for a blessing? I don't do blessings.
Yeah, you don't do blessings? You have a Master of Divinity. You can't tell God what to do? Come on, give me a
Master
blessing.
of Divinity? No. If you go to seminary, you're probably less likely to know God. I had lots of friends who In fact, the guy I dated in seminary was an atheist by the time he left.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to see if there's any other. Most people are just talking about wild Alaskan salmon,
X-Files.
Megyn Kelly drinking out of mason jars. You're drinking out of a mason jar, aren't you?
You aren't?
No, I am. Mm-hmm. Look at that, twinsies. That's pretty awesome. I knew there was a reason.
Cur over here. I got a ball. I have a ball and a cur. There we go.
Nice. So you keep two? Why don't you just have one?
Yeah, people have been getting on me about drinking from a jar. I'm like, do you understand how nice the weight is? And it's just.
I like the big ones.
Perfectly grasped.
I like big. I like.
Yeah, you go big.
Yeah, go big or go home. Come on. I mean, plus then it gives people something else to rail on in the chat besides me and my glasses. Somebody asked, what is your stance on nuclear energy? Do you have I mean, they were asking me, but do you have a stance on nuclear energy?
That's beyond my pay grade. Isn't it better?
It's clean. Yeah, I mean, it's clean on the output.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Here's the one valid pushback on. Say that again.
What's the valid pushback? Three-eyed frogs, gay frogs.
No, a valid pushback is obviously it's like anything that when something goes wrong, it's really bad. Like it's really, really bad. Yeah. And this guy that I interviewed in Knoxville, who was kind of he was a scientist, but he was kind of anti-nuclear energy. Was talking a lot about how just rote the job is of just like monitoring the buttons and, and people falling asleep and not having the training. And so if you're not keeping tabs on what's going on there, like, okay, let's take Seattle's water treatment facilities for an example. They're old. The government's not keeping tabs on them. Then they have problems. Yeah. Then there's a backup, a little dinghy, whatever they're called, breaks, and now we have gazillions of gallons of raw sewage going into Puget Sound. All right, well, that sucks. That's not good, but that's not a radioactive disaster. So the real pushback is like, how do you keep nuclear energy from going down the path of other facilities that have had serious problems? Coal plant, for instance. I covered the TVA ash spill in Knoxville, Tennessee when I was there. An entire fly ash pond broke in the middle of the night. I think it was because it was a freezing night and there was cracks because of the water, and it just wasn't maintained. And this is I mean, it's sort of government, sort of private, but it just demolished all these homes. People died. And so, once again, crappy situation, people died, but it's not like releasing nuclear. Exactly. So if you're going to think about nuclear energy, you have to be very serious about safety. And not just like selling people that it's just amazing and there's no problem with. There's a problem, life is pain, Highness. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something, right? And you have to make sure that with, nuclear energy that you're doing your due diligence. So I'm glad we had that conversation. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Is there anything else you would like to say about Evergreen? Did we get to the... I don't even know if we ever got to the main point.
Evergreen was kind of a radioactive spill.
Oh, okay. So we're coming back full circle.
Yeah. I don't know, but I have to be honest. I've been in my studio doing live streams for 4 hours now.
Oh, okay. So you're just a little tired.
My eyes are starting to bleed upon the extractions of these LEDs.
Okay. So this is the question. I don't know if people are going to get to this point, and maybe I'll clip some else off of this because I said earlier. This is demonetization April. So as we're wrapping this up, everybody, remember this is demonetization April. And I'm demonetizing my uploads in April. And there are links in the description for where you can go get exclusive content and support my work on other platforms. Besides YouTube, where I regularly get community guideline strikes. If you'd like to do that, again, links in the description. Also link for Benjamin's YouTube channel so you can go watch his documentary. And some of this is going to end up cut from this live stream. So if you're watching this later, you're going to see me saying this, but you're not going to see the end.
Wait, are you cutting like?
No, I'm only going to cut. No. I'm going to leave. I will leave all that.
My monologue, like I had to work up to that.
Let's do this. I will not cut anything before this exact moment right here. I will not cut anything before this exact moment. However, after this, I wanted to ask you about your cat because I heard you have a producer that's a cat.
I have two cat producers.
And do you have a name for them? Your cat?
What? Bijou and Bodie, but you want their
Don't
official
you call
names? You
them
want
your
the like?
cat production staff? Or isn't there was somebody?
I might have mouthed off
I'm gonna
about
go all
that
the way to the
once, or
beginning
somebody.
and see if I can find. Probably not. Somebody, because I have a 10-month-old producer, so I just thought it was funny that we have useless producers, both the
Okay,
two of us.
you're not gonna lecture me about the damage that cats do to local wildlife,
No.
because they don't bring in birds, just voles, little tiny voles.
Meat byproducts. Congrats, leaving old school media. Did the same. P.S. Nuke power is super safe. You left old school media. Tell me more. Courtney says, thank you both. I enjoy both of your channels tremendously.
Hey, Courtney.
Okay. I got to try to think of one question to ask you that people are going to go over to the other platforms for. What's a good question? Anybody have a really good question that we want to hear Benjamin answer right now and then cut it later so everybody can cry?
When you're looking at me and we're interviewing, where are you looking? Could you look at me so I know? Okay,
I'm
right now. Okay.
Well, now I'm looking at the camera. I can't see you. Okay. But when I look this way, I'm looking at you.
Okay, all right.
And then when I'm looking at the comments, I'm looking over here.
Yeah, okay. I got it. What do you guys want to know about me?
My cats are lazy AF. Well, okay. I guess my big question is, what do
you not get about Evergreen?
No, I get it. I think I pretty much understand Evergreen. I guess my final question is, why did you decide this is what I want to start doing, right? Like this is the hill I'm dying on. This is what I want to do. Why this? Because I think that's a really, I would ask Bret the same thing. Like at some point, I guess, you decide maybe, okay, like I'm just really passionate about something, whether it's this or it's something else. I don't know. I'm just curious. Like tons of things you could have done with your degree, other things you could have talked about. Why this? Why did you choose this topic? And this is what I'm going to cut. So everybody go to Locals and Patreon. The links are in the description. Go.